Hey guys, Nate, BleepinJeep. I'm gonna put this engine in the truck today under its own weight on motor mounts with some special adapters that we're gonna machine, hopefully. We're gonna see what we can do here. I'd like to see this turn into some sort of machining device. So anyway, let's get started. So we're gonna use this chunk of aluminum here, try to machine some sort of a plate. I say machine loosely. Cut it with the tools that I have into some sort of a plate that's gonna make it to where I can remote mount a oil filter. This is said oil filter. I'm gonna basically set this up remote mount somewhere and then tie this into a cooler and do whatever we have to in order to make it work.
I treat you like a child.
So here's what we're working with. This back side's the engine side. This is the side that's going to come out. And the end result, I basically want to have two fittings similar to this tapped. This fitting here, where this lines up on the block, is going to be really close to the injection pump. So we are going to move the hole over to here somewhere. And then the lower hole is just going to come out exactly where it's supposed to. And then I looked it up, there's actually two return holes. So on the back side, I'm going to machine this hole over to make sure that on the block it can return into both spots. And then we're going to do a nice little machine job here to kind of move this hole away from our injection pump, which is going to set right here. There it is. Adapter's all done and mounted, all ready to go. So we've got one more adapter plate to make, and that'll be for the turbo oil feed line. I'm gonna do a similar thing, basically just kind of make a block, tap a hole so I can put my own fitting in there, and then that way I can run a feed line from the oil filter housing I'm gonna use to the turbo. New template for the turbo oil feed line. It's gonna be really hard to pick up on camera, but inside here is a really small hole, much smaller than what the line size is. On this side, it's appropriate. It's, you know, whatever this line size, and then they neck it down to something extremely small on the turbo supply side. What they usually do that for is to try and keep you from blowing out turbo seals. So on my adapter I accommodated for that. This is really close to what the same size hole is that I can't measure in there, but this is approximately the same. I was able to get a drill bit and kind of stick it in the end to see how close I could get it. So what I'm going to do is oversize this part of the way down so I can tap it and make it for a fitting, but then it'll still have a small orifice to limit the amount of total volume. Almost made a dire mistake. I was about to finish cutting this out, and then I wouldn't have had any way to really grab it very well to finish drilling that hole and to tap it. So pulled it off real quick. You can see I drilled the hole most of the way down, but I still wanted to leave that smaller end on it to make sure that I limit the amount of oil that can pass through. Now I'm gonna go tap it. There it is. I hope this is focusing. So let's go see how it fits. Looks about right. Let's get rid of what's left of these motor mounts. It looks like they welded it on top, bolted it in on bottom. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the air hammer and we're going to pop this off nice and clean. This works really well. I've used this for this purpose for years. It is very effective. Look at that. Clean frame rails. That's what we're after. Let's put this bad boy in here. Probably hard to see, but we've made contact. That plate is butted all the way up against the transmission. So it looks like this is where we're going to be sitting. I'm going to thread a bolt or two in and make sure that I clock the engine correctly. If you don't know what that means, a lot of times your engine will be off one way or another depending on where it needs to be. So I don't have any play. This isn't a clockable adapter plate, but I do need to make sure that before I build these motor mounts, I run some bolts through, and it's going to end up, I guarantee it's not sitting where it needs to be right now. I bet it needs to be clocked one way or the other in order to get the bolts to line up. So I'll mess around with that and then start figuring out my motor mounts. Okay, we've got our engine mounts in, at least on. Now we just need to build a plate to go from the frame to the mount. I plan on doing something probably just flat across the bottom with a hole drilled in the middle so that there's a bolt that goes up from the bottom of that mount, so that way I can access that bolt, and then probably just shore it up, weld it to the frame right here. So let's get started. So here we have one of the mounts. This is the top, this is the bottom. Basically going to trace and cut, and then measure and cut where it's going to meet up with the frame, and then probably just shore something up on the sides in order to make sure it's got some rigidity. So now I tack weld the sides on stuff like this. That way whenever I'm drilling one hole, I'm going through both plates. Helps simplify the fabrication process. Now we're going to hole saw right in the middle. Didn't have room to get it on my vise, so I had to screw it to a board first. Well, the holes are done. Now it's time to separate. You can see you basically run some bolts down the top, and then there's one that you can access that goes up through the bottom. And that's why I did the hole saw here. So theoretically, these plates should break apart. There we go. Just a big nice flat plate, pretty straightforward. And then I'm going to build some gussets for the side to give it some strength, and then somehow make an arm or something off of the side of it to hit this little mini shock thing. So here's how I figure out what kind of gussets to use or make brackets and tabs and stuff. I just cut up this Audi box, and then I take a couple measurements of the frame, take a couple measurements of where it sets as opposed to the bracket, and then I just kind of lay it all out on a piece of cardboard. Let's set this up here. I lay it all out on a piece of cardboard, and then I cut it, come over and test fit. So this is going to be a gusset for one side, and then the other side is going to be a little bit, have a couple more complications, nothing crazy, but I want to make sure that on this other gusset it comes down far enough to be an arm for this shock. So let's go make that one. So I know this next gusset, I want to have it about 3 tall and 8 long, and so what I usually do is I kind of like to round and taper edges and stuff, so I'll just find little chunks that I can trace of stuff, you know, you use washers, whatever is laying around your shop. And then let's see. So I'm probably going to put a little bit of a taper, and I'll cut this out and start modding it. The next step is to test fit and see how it all is going to line up. I think what I'm going to do is cut it at an angle and bring this down, and then that way I make sure that it won't, I make sure it's going to clear the bottom of the frame, and then I also make sure it's going to be able to go low enough that I can build a little tab off of the side for the shock absorber. So I'm going to go cut this at an angle and work out a few details. So next step that I do is I'll test fit that piece of cardboard. I cut the ends of these at an angle because I knew I was going to want it to kind of slope down. I didn't use an angle finder or do anything crazy. It doesn't have to be scientific if you don't want it to be. I just knew this would probably be about straight here, and I knew I wanted it to slope down. That way on the bottom part of the frame here I'd be able to clear, and then I knew that it would go low enough on this side that I'd be able to build a little arm off of it for this dampener. So I tack welded everything. Now I need to just go through and slowly finish weld it. Hopefully it doesn't warp too bad on me. And I'll just go from there. Then I'll go tack it on the rig. Got it all welded. Look close so you can see it's still steaming. Anyway, I'm going to let it cool down and then clean my welds up a little bit and go tack it on the rig. Got one tacked in. I'm just now starting to get going on the other side. Well, I'm going to try to do the same strategy, but these brake lines are right in the way, of course, so I'll have to accommodate for those a little bit. No big deal. About to start plasma cutting out some gussets. That little shock absorber hits on this side for whatever reason. And so I'm going to use a hole saw to clearance it, make sure we have plenty of room. See how that little shock is closer to the mount on this side? Now we have this nice little notch to give it a little bit of room. Let's weld these gussets in. Well, what do you think? Is that going to hold an old diesel motor? I sure hope so. Let's find out. There you have it. We have perches for motor mounts. They're all welded in. They seem plenty beef for what we're going to be doing. This thing's not going to make 1,400 foot-pounds of torque or anything bananas. So it should hold just fine. Next time we've got to modify some things on the engine before we plop it back in there, and of course paint our frame rails and perches. If you liked what you saw, please click like or subscribe, thumbs up, support us on Patreon, and check us out on social media. Thank you very much.